This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem. You know, I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. I do like to be wrong sometimes. Now, normally, I'd be complaining about Doctor Who news dropping early in the week where I can't just slot it into my normal Saturday video slot and have to crank something out short term, because this is going to be based off news that happened yesterday, assuming I get this fully turned around in the time frame that I am aiming for. But I'm not going to complain too much this time, because it's good news. I very sincerely didn't think we were going to get much in the way of Doctor Who news at all for a while. And it's nice to not only get news, but get good news. So there's a few things. There is finally, confirmation that Disney is done with its Doctor Who deal and partnership. And right away, we then found out that the BBC is confirming a new holiday special, Christmas 2026, which Russell T Davies will be writing. And there's a few other things tied to that or that happened relatively close that I'll bring up and discuss as well. But that's the main headline. And as a reminder, I really didn't think that we were going to get more Doctor Who stuff for 3 to 5 years. Now, the 3 to 5 year time frame that I had kind of predicted previously was based off a couple of things. It was based off, one, Disney waiting out the clock until after the War Between the Land and the Sea miniseries came out and then didn't do the numbers necessary to make the deal worth keeping around, which we all knew wasn't going to be the case. There was no way that that miniseries was going to have numbers big enough to tip the scale if the numbers that Disney was getting on seasons 1 and 2 with Gatwa weren't enough on their own. There was no way that that was going to tip the scale. But they seem to be interested in running out the clock. And depending on the way the contract is worded, they probably had the ability to do that. Now, that would have meant that the BBC could not come up with more than tentative plans for what to do past that, because until you know who you're partnered with, what kind of money you're bringing in and everything else, it's really difficult to plan in terms of what you're going to do, the time frame that you're going to do it in, and how much money you need to put up or how much you can get from partners. That's why these contracts matter, and Disney dragging their feet on this was a big pain in the butt. Well, Disney has confirmed, even ahead of the release of War Between the Land and the Sea, that they're out, which, not a shock. We all knew that. I suspect that the BBC has probably been pressuring them almost nonstop since the end of season 2, going, look, we know you're not going to re-up the contract. We know that. Will you please just confirm that so that we can move on and do other stuff? And looks like they finally did. And possibly linked to that, they've also now moved the release of War Between the Land and the Sea up. Sort of. So originally it was supposed to come out this year, 2025. The last we had heard, it had been pushed back to 2026. Now it looks like it's being moved up to 2025 again. I suspect it might actually partially be in regards to wrapping up this contract and actually finishing it out as quickly as possible to avoid any weird gray areas in terms of what BBC or anyone else is allowed to do and make progress on the thing with other partners potentially. Although I suspect at this point they don't have other partners lined up, because it's hard to get those negotiations going when you don't know for certain when you're going to get released from the contract that you're currently in, and there is at least the possibility, it was never going to happen, but possibility that you might not be released from that contract. But BBC is now going to be able to potentially partner with some other people. And if you're outside the UK, you should want them to, at the very least, for the distribution of the thing. Because while The War Between the Land and the Sea will still come out on Disney Plus, because it's part of that contract, this Christmas special right now is just a planned release on iPlayer and BBC. So will it air outside that? Will it air in US territories, on streaming, on BBC America? We don't know. They've got some time to sort that out, but not a ton of time. These kinds of contracts do take a while to negotiate more often than not, so they don't have the most time in the world on that, but they do have some time to sort that out. Now, obviously, the big question is, what's it going to be? Too early to call. I will say this. Russell T Davies coming back, it does feel appropriate for this at least, if for no other reason than to kind of pick up the pieces from where things were left at the end of Gatwa's run. Now, I've talked about all that exhaustively in terms of what a mess that ending was. Though that said, let's tangent for a little bit, because another thing that happened relatively recently was that Carol Ann Ford basically came out and confirmed the thing we all knew to be true, which was that the original ending for Gatwa did not involve a regeneration and involved a reveal with Carol Ann Ford and the young girl who played Poppy basically witnessing him dancing at a club and then leaving. She's pretty much confirmed all of this, and I can only imagine how frustrated she is that she shot all that and none of it was used. Like, the stuff that was used was just the stuff in Interstellar Song Contest, which ultimately now turns out it went nowhere. Like, I understand that Davies doubtlessly had really tight restrictions on what he could or couldn't do in terms of the reshoots, in terms of how long he had to write and or shoot it, in terms of what kind of resources he had, in terms of who he could get, and how much money was going to be spent on the reshoots. I'm sure it was incredibly tight restrictions on all of it. That having been said, boy, would I have preferred if he'd kept that footage in, just because what'd you even bother bringing Carol Ann Ford back for? So, yeah, my general thoughts on that is, if I'm being completely honest, I probably still wouldn't have liked it, because there seems to have been the implication that Poppy is, now effectively the doctor's daughter, making Poppy Susan's grandmother, and like, I both do and don't like that. I don't like that in the sense of, I don't need this kind of stuff tied up. It shouldn't be neat and tidy. Doctor Who's been around for ages. He time traveled. His history should be messy. But on the other hand, it does slightly lean into the messiness. And there was a throwaway line, or what I thought was a throwaway line, in the first season where the doctor kind of mentions that he knew his granddaughter Susan, but didn't know who Susan's parents were, because Time Lord, family trees and everything else are weird and confusing. And I kind of liked that. That wasn't something that I needed an answer to, but at the very least, if that had happened, it would have fed into that. This idea that he had traveled with his granddaughter long before his own kid, who was actually Susan's mother, was even born. And, that kid's born and Susan actually meets her when Susan herself is very old. Like, that's weird timey-wimey bendiness I kind of like. I don't need these things tied off or, connected. So there's that. But I would have preferred it to what we got, but if we had just gotten it straight up and I didn't have what we got instead to compare it to, I probably wouldn't have loved it, if I'm being honest. But since I do have what we got to compare it to, I would have preferred that. But anyways, that just happened to like sort of come out around the same time. So circling back to Davies, there is a big Billy Piper shaped hole that kind of needs to get filled and dealt with. So I had mentioned previously that I don't think the fact that Billy Piper wasn't actually credited as the Doctor at the end of Reality War, I don't think that was an indication of anything. My suspicion was just that it had to do with contracts, and she wasn't contractually cast as the Doctor at that point in time, and so she couldn't be credited as that. She's going to be the Doctor in this special, and I will be very surprised if at the end of the special, if she is still the Doctor. Now, how that is dealt with, that's going to be an interesting question. I am kind of assuming that, just because here's part of the issue with Doctor Who specifically, and this is an issue on multiple levels. Doctor Who is a difficult show to run. It's a very demanding show to run and to star in. And also, the rewards on it, at least the tangible ones, aren't great. Like, look, for as big as Doctor Who is as an international brand, the pay that the showrunners get, at least if you're comparing to, like, say, Hollywood showrunners for something like a major network show in the US, it's not great. It's not amazing. Similarly with starring, like, people over there in the industry do not, even at the higher end of what is known over there, generally don't get paid on the same magnitude as what happens in Hollywood. So it's a very demanding job. And if you're show running, you are going to be under scrutiny of a lot of really, really demanding fans, some of whom are unreasonably so. And you have to deal with all this. And so this is, I honestly strongly believe, part of why RTD was brought back in the first place. I think it's really hard to find a showrunner who's passionate enough about Doctor Who to commit to the time that it's going to take and deal with all the crap that comes with it. And RTD, was willing to do that. And I'm not sure how many people who don't have a true passion for Doctor Who are. Now, I'm sure some people will go like, well, if you're not passionate about Doctor Who, you shouldn't be running it anyway. To which my counter is, we've been having basically insider mega fans running Doctor Who for the entirety of its revival, and whatever good is going to come out of that system, I feel like we've gotten. I don't think it would be the end of the world to bring in somebody who does not currently have a really deep love of Doctor Who, but is willing to invest themselves to learn about it and get involved in it. Like, a really solid example of that is the director of Wrath of Khan. He didn't know a dang thing about Star Trek when he signed up to do that job. But you know what? He then went and learned a whole bunch about Star Trek so that he could be good at that job. You don't need to get somebody who is a lifelong fan. That is not and should not be a requirement. But on the other hand, given what this job entails and how, let's go with how much of a handful the fan base can be, if you don't have that level of fandom already for Doctor Who, it's a tough pitch for showrunners to come in and do. I would say even more so than something like Star Trek, because at least Star Trek, there's these separate series. Yeah, sure, the showrunner of Discovery is going to get crap. The showrunner of Strange New Worlds is going to get crap. But they're not going to get crap that is the weight of the entire franchise. Doctor Who is just Doctor Who. It is the entire thing, is just the show. I know they've tried to do spinoffs and they've had some, and most of them weren't worth it. But you do kind of carry the burden of the whole thing. And similarly with anyone who they have in to play the Doctor. So I think that is also a difficulty in casting, because trying to get someone to fill these shoes, again, assuming that I'm right and Billie Piper is not going to be staying on long term, which, again, I think just kind of, all right, Billie Piper is not the biggest name in the world, but she's a big enough name that she works steadily, that for her to get involved, it's not a vastly dissimilar situation to kind of what was part of the issue with Gatwa, which is she's busy and she's getting offers and she's got other stuff she can be doing. To play the Doctor is a commitment to not do anything else for a while. And depending on where you are in your career, that might not be a potentially tempting thing for you to do. That does appear, not fully confirmed, but does appear to have kind of been the case with Gatwa. His career's been on the rise. He's had a lot of work to do and a lot of offers thrown his way. Honestly, if they were going to get him, they should have gotten him some years ago, before his star was on the rise and before it was going to be a case of it's not worth it for him to basically sit around indefinitely waiting for the third series to be pulled together, which, again, not 100% confirmed, but I do strongly believe is why he chose to leave. And I don't blame him for that. Given that they were waiting on Disney, and even with Disney now finally having pulled out, not knowing how quickly everything's going to be pulled together. Because sure, they've announced a Christmas special, but what about after that? We have no idea. And I suspect they're currently scrambling, trying to figure out what is after that. It's just a difficult thing. And I don't blame an actor for going, I don't want to sit around keeping a big hole in my schedule on the off chance you figure out what you're doing. So I don't blame Gatwa for leaving. The thing that it resulted in, I don't like at all, but I don't blame him. So I keep saying I don't expect Billie Piper to stick around. Again, I think a lot of that's logistics. I think she was, willing to be put in there as a placeholder, to be sure that things kind of keep going and that somebody was set up. But I fully expect the next holiday special to end with her out of the role. Now, does that mean I think we'll see the next Doctor after that? No, not really. Like, we might, don't get me wrong, but my suspicion is that we're going to end up with kind of an open-ended regeneration where it's clear that she has regenerated, but we don't see into whom yet, which is what a fair few people have said should have happened with the Gatwa regeneration if you didn't know if you were going to have more. You should have just left it open-ended so that you could deal with it later. I actually kind of expect that to be the case for the Christmas special, because otherwise they are on a really tight time crunch to get a new Doctor cast. Because keep in mind, usually the current Doctor announces their departure. Well, heck, not even just announces, makes the creators aware that they are intending to depart a while before they actually leave, which means there is the remainder of their tenure plus extra time past that for a new Doctor to be found and cast and prepped and worked with. Now, this isn't necessarily a scripting issue unless you have specific storylines planned, because it's been noted by Doctor Who fans for a while that a really well-written Doctor can be played by basically any performer who has played the Doctor, and you will get a performance tailored to them, because the Doctor can be written kind of in broad strokes, like here's the general thing that the Doctor would say, and the specificity of a specific performance is very often brought by the performer. Like, I've pointed this out before. You can find clips of other Doctors reading speeches from Doctors who, they didn't perform that, but they do it in their own way, even though it was written for another Doctor, and it sounds like it was written for them.
The question of the hour is, who's got the Pandorica? Answer. I do! The question, who's coming to take it from me?
So it's possible that whatever the script is for the holiday special has already been worked on, or maybe even has a finished draft already. So I'm not worried about that necessarily being rushed, because it could have been getting done without a ton of specifics prior to this. But as far as the next Doctor after Billie Piper, if she regenerates, which I expect she will, I think the open-ended thing is going to kind of be a necessity, if only so that they are not under a massive time crunch to either, depending on what kind of person they go for, either go through an audition process that's more or less open-ended, trying to find someone who isn't very well known, like what happened when they got Matt Smith, or to go through the negotiation process with somebody who is a bigger name, which is the kind of thing that had to happen with folks like, say, Capaldi or Whittaker, who were far more established actors than Matt Smith or even David Tennant at the time he initially took the part were. So I expect that's going to be the major reason to have an open-ended regeneration, is just straight logistics, to give whatever is happening next the most breathing room. Whether or not Davies stays on past this Christmas special, I don't know. Like I said, I feel like in a lot of ways he ended up with this job because they have trouble getting showrunners for this. My suspicion, and I have no evidence for this, this is just gut instinct. My suspicion is that he doesn't really want to keep doing it, and the BBC probably wants somebody else in that position as well, given the very divided reaction to the Gatwa era. It's a question of whether they can find somebody or not, and get somebody who will commit to doing this. That's the open question. And I think that's an even bigger open question than finding the next Doctor is, to be honest. And that one I really don't know the answer to. Will Davies continue to tough it out if they are having trouble finding somebody? Maybe. Will he do that indefinitely? Probably not. I have a feeling Davies probably wants to leave as soon as he can get somebody else to take the reins. It's just finding that somebody else who's qualified, has the the experience to run a show like this, and is willing to do it. Best of luck to them, I suppose. But ultimately, we're getting a Christmas special in 2026, which I absolutely didn't think was going to happen. And that just feels good. That feels nice to know that I'm not looking down the barrel of going years, multiple years, without anything Doctor Who related. I can subsist on just a holiday special. There were stretches during Moffat's era where we very much had to do that. I can manage on that. And I'll be hopeful. I mean, we'll see. I mean, eventually we'll get, trailers and whatever villains are going to be in this. We'll find out more, and maybe that'll get me more excited. Maybe it'll get me less. There's also the fact that traditionally I haven't been the biggest fan of the holiday specials just because they go for a slightly more camp pantomime tone, which I understand. I know other people like. I don't as much. So, is this my ideal? No, but it does kind of reaffirm that the BBC is committed to continuing to put out Doctor Who, which they've said. This is kind of putting their money where their mouth was. And it's not that I doubted it, because Doctor Who is too big and too valuable a franchise to just let go away. And while they haven't done that in the past, they let it go on hiatus. We're not in the same media landscape we were in '89. We're just not. We are now at a point where franchises are king, and you do not let a franchise go dormant if you can help it. And you definitely don't let it die. So, we'll see what we get. What are your thoughts on all this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, and helps me be able, on the occasions where it happens, to turn around something this quickly. Because trust me, if I had a day job, you wouldn't have been getting this video this fast. But whatever your thoughts are and whether or not you can help me, those are all great. I like all that stuff. Like, share, subscribe. Those help as well. Don't worry too much about any of that, though. Because what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Subin Lutfulla, Andicate 808, Mara G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, The Baba Duchess, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Baraba Joggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. I also want to give my thanks to all the supporters who didn't get named, because you are all indeed very nifty people. You could be a nifty person too if you go support me on Patreon. And there's the clause. Ugh.